Geronta and Brianna. At around 12:30 a.m. on August 30th, 2014, in Decatur, Georgia, Calvin Reddick informed the police that his stepson, Geronta Brown, 24, along with his fiancée Brianna Brooks, who was 7 months pregnant, had been taken from his home. The bodies were later discovered, executed by being shot in the backs of their heads. The scene of the crime revealed how terrifying their final moments had been. There appeared to be more and more individuals who might have been involved, which made the case increasingly complex. It grew darker as time went on. Although the police rushed to Calvin Reddick's residence, the perpetrators had already escaped. More than 5 hours had passed since the initial 911 call when another frightening call came through. When officers arrived at the murder scene, they discovered that both Geronta and Brianna had been shot in the backs of their heads at close range, like victims facing execution. Their hands had also been tied behind their backs. Brianna was found barely clinging to life and transported to the hospital, but it was too late to rescue Geronta. Investigators searched the scene thoroughly for evidence and uncovered something significant. They recovered a 9mm bullet and a matching shell casing near the bodies. As the homicide inquiry progressed, Calvin, Geronta's stepfather, explained to officers that the abductors had phoned him multiple times following the kidnapping and had demanded $150,000 in order to secure the girl's safe return. These ransom calls turned into a crucial lead that directed detectives toward the culprits. Investigators obtained Calvin's phone records and traced the number used for the cash demand. They contacted the cell provider, which identified who was placing the ransom calls, though uncertainty remained over the name Tom Lewis. Because of this, detectives had to revise their plan to capture the offenders. However, before police could act on their adjusted plan, they received an extremely important call from Geronta's sister, who revealed shocking information regarding Calvin, his stepfather. According to her, Calvin was solely responsible for what had occurred, which led police to suspect he may have orchestrated the entire crime. Shortly thereafter, detectives summoned Calvin for questioning to confirm their suspicions. Calvin remained remarkably calm and composed while being interrogated, and he willingly agreed to share his version of events. Calvin stated that it all began that dreadful night when Brianna, Geronta, and her daughter went out to get food. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Geronta and Brianna were in danger, but no one was able to save them. The masked men, who were dressed as FBI agents, then came to Calvin's door and knocked. Calvin explained that when he refused to open the door, they drove off in the van with Geronta and Brianna. Yet that was not the end of the situation. A few minutes later, the intruders phoned and demanded ransom money. The kidnappers instructed him over the phone not to involve the police, but when they discovered he had already contacted them, they became enraged and threatened to kill Brianna and Geronta if the calls continued. The investigators paid close attention to one part of his account as they listened. The criminals demanded a ransom that amounted to a very large sum. Why were the kidnappers so confident that Calvin could afford to pay such a substantial amount of money? The detectives were dissatisfied with Calvin's explanation, so they pressed him further for details. The officers did not receive any valuable information from Calvin about the offenders, leaving them uncertain whether he had played any role in the incident. By that point, however, investigators had obtained the phone records of the ransom caller. After analyzing them, they discovered that the suspect had called a specific number 88 times in the 7 days preceding the crime. They suspected there was a strong possibility that the woman who owned the number might help lead them to the actual culprits. They tracked the woman down and interrogated her to learn how she was linked to the suspect. Shockingly, the woman immediately blurted out an unusual nickname as soon as the detective mentioned the number, just E. She then explained how she had come to know E. She regarded E merely as a casual fling, but investigators had to press harder and request additional information. They asked her to provide a detailed description of E's appearance, and she agreed to help them identify his real name. At that point, the officers were unaware that she was concealing a terrible secret. But the officers kept searching for E by dialing numbers from the phone records. They worked tirelessly for hours before finally coming across a solid lead. Similar to the previous woman, the man on the line did not know much about the suspect apart from his name, E. However, he promised he would call back if he learned anything else. While waiting for additional leads, The agent's primary objective was to track down E and uncover his true identity. They hoped Brianna might provide clues, but as time passed, that possibility seemed to fade. Her condition remained extremely critical. 3 days later, devastating news arrived. Brianna's health was not improving, so her family decided to remove her from life support. Nevertheless, Brianna's baby daughter was saved by the doctors. The physicians explained that the girl would grow up to live a normal life and would not suffer complications that might have ended her life despite being born prematurely. With Brianna's death, the case became a double homicide. As matters deteriorated, investigators shifted their focus to the man from E's phone records. He had told them that he would try to learn more about E's location and call immediately, but he had not contacted them in over 3 days. Detectives re-examined his phone records to determine how many times his number appeared. What they uncovered was alarming. In fact, he had called E after officers first asked for his assistance, yet he chose not to inform them about it. That was not even the most disturbing part. Investigators scrutinized E's phone history and discovered that she had spoken with this man merely 2 hours before Brianna and Geronta were abducted. Police became convinced that this man was concealing information and that they needed to uncover what it was. Soon they also managed to obtain his phone records and learned that the man was Andre Gates, 38 years old. The police searched Andre's name in their system and discovered he had a criminal past. He was arrested on November 24, 1990, and had served 24 years in prison for killing 2 individuals. He had actually been released only 7 months earlier and was currently on probation. When detectives reviewed the homicide report for Andre, they noted that he had been committing a series of apartment robberies. Fueled by adrenaline, he fired shots into one unit, killing a 39-year-old woman and her 6-month-old infant. With this knowledge, Andre became a prime suspect in the case. Detectives needed to bring him in for questioning. However, they were forced to adjust their plans before that could take place. As of 9 days after Brianna and Geronta were abducted, the case was being reported by major news networks and was drawing a great deal of attention. During this period, agents received numerous tips, but one tip stood out and required their immediate focus. A woman contacted the homicide division to report that one of her close friends had received a message likely connected to Brianna and Geronta's kidnapping and murder. The police promptly went to speak with the man who had gotten this message. Detectives learned that someone had mistakenly called him 30 minutes after Brianna and Geronta were taken and had left a 3-minute voicemail. Yet that was not the only revelation. What the man next told investigators left them completely stunned. Detectives became convinced that Andre was tied to the abduction of Brianna and Geronta, even though they did not know for certain that the message came from him. The voicemail was taken back by detectives to be analyzed further at headquarters. After listening carefully to every word on the voicemail, the agents were horrified, imagining how terrified Brianna and Geronta must have been that awful night. But there was another detail in the message that especially caught their attention. They heard a voice that sounded eerily similar to someone already familiar to them. The voices of Brianna and Geronta were not the only ones that stood out. The police quickly recognized who the other woman was. It was the same woman whose voice they had heard before, the very one who had first told them about E. This confirmed to the agents that they were moving in the right direction and getting closer to solving the double homicide. Yet a few missing pieces of the puzzle still remained. Investigators eventually contacted Andre and arranged a meeting with him to gather further information. Detectives devised a strategy before Andre arrived. They did not want to confront him about the voicemail immediately. First, they wanted to see how much Andre was willing to reveal on his own. From the start of the questioning, Andre appeared defensive. His claim was that he had been at home with his wife the night the abductions occurred. Because Andre was questioned extensively, a new name entered the picture: Fathead. Andre admitted that he used to spend time with a man known by that nickname, dropping fragments of information. Andre was making the investigation extremely difficult for officers. Detectives realized they could not make progress with him stonewalling this way. It was time to play their wild card. Andre seemed unaware of what was happening around him. His behavior suggested he did not grasp what detectives were actually implying. Detectives realized the interrogation was leading nowhere because Andre's behavior remained unchanged. They decided to step out of the room, but they were not leaving empty-handed. During the questioning, they had noticed something that did not sit right. Investigators believed that one of the voices on the voicemail sounded very much like Andre, but they required solid evidence to prove it, as well as confirmation that the voicemail had been recorded during Brianna and Geronta's abduction. Since there was insufficient proof to obtain a warrant for his arrest, Andre had to be released. While keeping a close watch on him, detectives worked to identify Fathead and determine how to track him down. They were convinced that locating Fathead would ultimately lead them to E. At that very moment, another officer overheard the agents discussing Fathead. He approached them and revealed something completely unexpected. The officer explained that he was already working on a case involving Fathead and that there was even an active murder warrant issued against him. He further stated that Fathead was a 40-year-old man whose real name was Richard Wilson. When detectives searched the database, they found that Fathead had a long criminal history. He had been convicted of armed robbery, aggravated assault, and manslaughter, and had only recently been released from prison. The officer investigating Fathead believed he had murdered his robbery partner 8 months earlier. He had been searching for him for months without success. Although investigators now knew more about Fathead, they still could not determine where he was hiding. They next turned to the woman whose voicemail they had listened to and who had previously been questioned while they were searching for E. Detectives suspected this woman was not being truthful. 3 days later, she was summoned for another interrogation. It was time to confront her directly. When she appeared for questioning, she arrived with a lawyer. It was clear she understood the seriousness of her situation and the charges she might face, which explained her decision to bring legal counsel. This did not discourage the detectives. Their only hope was that she could guide them to Fathead and E, providing the missing pieces of the puzzle. The woman admitted to officers that she had known Andre before he went to prison in 1990, which was the first question they asked her. Because of that, she claimed she had not spoken to him since then. She had not spoken to him much after his release from prison. Yet this renewed connection with Andre was turning into a terrible nightmare for her. According to police, the woman said Andre phoned her on the night of the abduction and asked to meet up. Eventually, she agreed. To her shock, Fathead appeared with him. She then explained that Andre and Fathead drove the van to Calvin's house, Geronta's father, and parked outside, waiting for the family to arrive. As soon as they did, Andre and Fathead carried out the plan. The woman recounted to investigators that Andre and Fathead handcuffed Brianna and Geronta, dragged them across the street, and forced them into the van. They compelled her to participate in the scheme, even though she had no prior knowledge of it. When she saw how helpless Brianna and Geronta were, she tried to console them, but she already understood what was going to happen. They drove the van to an apartment complex and telephoned Calvin to demand money for the safe return of Geronta and Brianna. Fathead abruptly ended the call in anger. He had just discovered that Calvin had notified police about the crime. Furious, Fathead jumped into the van with Brianna and Geronta and drove to a dark, secluded street. Another car, carrying Andre and the woman, followed behind. Fathead then ordered the woman to leave, so she drove off, but Andre remained at the scene. And with that, the complete picture of what had occurred that horrific night became clear. Investigators finally knew the entire truth. Still, one final question lingered. What exactly did he do, and where was he hiding? Detectives were utterly stunned when they uncovered the answer. They had been circling endlessly in their search for E the entire time. But in the end, he was nothing more than an illusion. He was simply a persona invented by Andre, a smokescreen meant to mislead investigators and prevent them from uncovering the truth. After the woman's confession, police possessed all the evidence required to arrest Andre and Fathead. Yet they still needed proof placing them at the crime scene. Cell tower analysis of Andre's phone records confirmed that he had been present at the crime scene on August 1st. With this, officers finally had everything necessary to send Andre to prison. 3 days later, they brought him back in for another round of interrogation. Maintaining a composed demeanor, Andre tried to appear unconcerned. In addition, he flatly denied that the incriminating voicemails were his responsibility. Andre remained convinced that he could escape unscathed, deluded by his own fantasies. Detectives, however, now turned their focus toward Fathead, since Andre was already in custody. The very next day, Fathead was brought back to Atlanta for questioning. Investigators expected him to deny involvement and fabricate stories, but instead, Fathead admitted from the outset that he had killed Brianna and Geronta by shooting them. He confessed this with a cold, expressionless face. He explained that he had done it because he believed Calvin, Geronta's father, had large sums of money hidden in his house. For months, he and his associates had been following Calvin, gathering information about him and his family. He stated that he and Andre seized Geronta and Brianna, then began pounding on the door in an attempt to take control. When no one answered, they forcibly removed Brianna and Geronta instead. Detectives were stunned by how casually Fathead described the murders. He appeared to feel no remorse for his crimes. Although Fathead delivered a full confession before leaving the interrogation room, there was still a heavy sense of unease. At trial, both men admitted to 2 counts of murder and were sentenced to life imprisonment. The woman who had accompanied Andre and Fathead was not charged with any crime. Geronta and Brianna's daughter, Kaylee Brown, was raised by her grandmother, Sadria, Brianna's mother. Kaylee continued to feel her mother's presence in her life despite Brianna's death, as Sadria gave her all the love Brianna would have provided. Before closing, we extend our deepest sympathies to the families of Brianna Brooks and Geronta Brown. Moving on to the next case. Jessica Gutierrez. Jessica Gutierrez, affectionately called Jessie by her family, was born on December 3, 1981, in the United States. She was the youngest of 4 siblings. The family resided in a humble mobile home situated in a rural part of South Carolina. In 1983, their calm life was disrupted when Jessica's parents divorced. The children remained in the full custody of their mother, Deborah, while their father, David Gutierrez, relocated to Mexico, living a transient lifestyle between there and California. After the divorce, Deborah worked tirelessly, securing a position at the United States Postal Service to provide for her children, ensuring their well-being despite the difficulties of raising 4 children alone. By June 1986, Deborah had become involved with a man whose behavior grew increasingly controlling and troubling, worsened further by his escalating alcohol use. Eventually, his conduct became intolerable, and Deborah forced him out of her life and home. Yet the sense of relief was fleeting, as her life soon descended into deeper turmoil. On June 5, 1986, what began as a seemingly ordinary early summer day unfolded in South Carolina. The weather was warm, with temperatures nearing 30 degrees Celsius and scattered clouds filling the sky. The family spent the day enjoying outdoor activities and strengthening their bond. That evening, Deborah prepared sandwiches for dinner and painted Jessica's nails before putting the children to bed. Keeping with her usual routine, Jessica asked to sleep in her mother's bed, and Deborah agreed. Later that night, when Jessica's older brother awoke feeling unwell and in pain, Deborah allowed him to take her bed, moving Jessica instead to the room at the end of the hallway, where she slept beside her sister Becky. The next morning, Deborah awoke to unsettling signs that marked the start of her nightmare. The front door was left open, the family dog roamed nervously, and a set of curtains lay on the floor, with the mosquito net seemingly torn away. Jessica was nowhere to be found. Her absence was made more haunting when Becky mentioned that a man with a magic hat and a beard had taken her. Panic surged through Deborah as she searched every possible hiding place, hoping Jessica was only playing. When those efforts failed, she frantically combed the area around the home before finally reporting Jessica missing at 9 a.m. The investigations carried out by the Lexington County Sheriff's Department revealed no evidence of a struggle and nothing missing from the home except for papers scattered across the bedroom floor. Investigators speculated that a kidnapper had entered through the back window, abducted Jessica without waking her, and exited through the front door. Search operations extended into the nearby woods and abandoned buildings in the rural community of Red Bank, which was even more isolated in 1986. Speculation persisted, along with Becky's unwavering account of the man with the magic hat, which continued to haunt the family as they pursued truth and justice under such grim circumstances. Authorities searched countless wooded areas and small streams and ponds in hopes of locating Jessica. Off-road vehicles were deployed to cover large tracts of land, and the sheriff's department dispatched a plane to fly over the region in search of any trace of the girl. Yet despite these efforts, no search produced results. Deborah was brought to the sheriff's department for questioning about the events of the previous 24 hours. She maintained that she had no idea what had happened to Jessica, but was certain of who was responsible. She accused her ex-boyfriend of taking Jessica, though he denied involvement. Investigators also examined the possibility of Jessica's father being involved, though he was in California at the time. Neither man was charged. By June 7th, The FBI and South Carolina law enforcement agencies had joined the search, issuing bulletins nationwide. This was a decade before the Amber Alert system and long before the Internet age. At that time, communication between departments was often slow and cumbersome. The sheriff's department placed a tap on Deborah's ex-boyfriend's phone to monitor all incoming and outgoing calls in case a ransom demand was made. Police confirmed to reporters that they believed Jessica had been abducted from the mobile home and had not wandered away on her own. Weeks into the investigation, detectives were left with only one physical clue: a fresh fingerprint discovered on the open back window, believed to be the point of entry on June 5th. The print was sent to the FBI, but no matches were found. In September 1986, the lead sheriff announced that they had identified a suspect, but insufficient evidence prevented charges. The suspect had failed a polygraph test, but since such results were inadmissible in court, it was not enough to warrant an arrest. In the years that followed, only faint glimmers of hope emerged. In 1987, police in Kansas contacted the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, reporting that they had located a girl resembling Jessica. Deborah immediately flew to Kansas, clinging to the hope of seeing her daughter again. But it was not Jessica. Heartbroken, Deborah returned to South Carolina, determined to keep her daughter's case alive. Tensions soon grew between her and the sheriff, as they often clashed and argued over the investigation's direction. Frustrated, Deborah resolved to carry out her own investigation while keeping Jessica's disappearance in the public eye. By June 1989, she revealed to the state newspaper that she had discovered fibers in an abandoned car linked to a family friend, who was at that time serving a sentence in North Carolina for assault. This marked a major revelation. 2 years earlier, Deborah had also received a letter from a North Carolina inmate claiming that his cellmate had confessed to abducting and killing a 4-year-old child in 1986. That cellmate, Thomas McDowell, was a registered sex offender who had lived in Lexington County during Jessica's disappearance and was personally acquainted with the Gutierrez family. According to the inmate, Thomas had confessed that he killed Jessica because she recognized him, further admitting he had disposed of her body in a landfill. He also claimed to have worn a tall cowboy hat and a beard at the time of the abduction. Thomas's cellmate not only informed Deborah, but also contacted police with the same account. This development prompted investigators to thoroughly interrogate Thomas, who expressed a willingness to provide them with every detail of the crime. However, he demanded immunity in return. Naturally, this was not an agreement the state was prepared to make, so Thomas remained imprisoned in North Carolina, and Jessica's case remained unresolved. Deborah's frustration and anger only deepened. In 1989, she told the state newspaper that it felt as though victims had no rights and that the system was failing families like hers. She was especially outraged that Thomas faced no charges, even after admitting to the crime and providing details that aligned with the events of June 5th. The most shocking development came when Thomas's fingerprints were taken and found to match the fingerprint recovered from the Gutierrez family's back window. In 2007, 21 years after Jessica's disappearance, Deborah openly criticized the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, accusing them of mishandling her daughter's case. She admitted that for years she had lived in fear of what might happen if she contradicted the sheriff, a powerful figure in South Carolina. But after more than 2 decades, she wanted progress and understood that gaining media attention was the only way forward. Local news outlets obtained access to a recorded telephone conversation between Deborah and the sheriff from June 1986, only days after Jessica vanished. The recording, made by the department's wiretapping unit, captured Deborah arguing with the sheriff, pressing him for answers while he was withdrawing investigators from the search. The sheriff's response was dismissive. He told her he would provide answers when he had them, then threatened to pull all his agents off the case and send them home if she continued to interfere. Deborah was outraged by his words, which she interpreted as a threat to her daughter's case. She countered by asking him what the citizens who had elected him would think if he abandoned Jessica. He coldly replied that they could elect him or not. It made no difference to him. When the transcript was made public in 2007, the sheriff explained that Deborah had accused him of favoritism and mishandling the investigation, remarks that had hurt his feelings. Deborah, meanwhile, voiced her frustration with the prosecutor, revealing that she had spent years attempting to get other agencies to assume control of the case, only to be blocked each time. That same year, the case was reviewed by the prosecutor, but no action was taken against any suspects. He explained that most of the available evidence was inadmissible and what little remained could be explained away or was overshadowed by reasonable doubt. He added that without a body, the state would require significantly stronger evidence to pursue a conviction. Afterward, the case slipped once more into obscurity, but the key figures connected to it began making headlines of their own. In 2014, Sheriff James Metz was indicted in federal court on 10 counts of bribery and wire fraud, ultimately sentenced to 12 months in prison. In 2016, prosecutor Donnie Myers was arrested for driving under the influence after crashing his vehicle into a utility pole and leaving the scene. He was fined $1,000 and retired from public service the following year, in 2017. In 2021, 35 years after Jessica's disappearance, the case drew renewed attention. Sheriff Jacob, elected following James Metz's imprisonment, announced that the county would partner with the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team to re-examine the case. In January 2022, a long-awaited breakthrough finally arrived. Police arrested 61-year-old Thomas Eric McDowell in connection with Jessica's abduction. McDowell, whom Jessica's mother had always suspected, had lived in Lexington County in 1986 and had long been considered a person of interest, though never fully pursued. He was taken into custody at his home and placed in the county detention center. Following the arrest, McDowell was formally charged with murder, kidnapping, and first-degree burglary in relation to Jessica Gutierrez's disappearance and presumed death. According to the arrest warrant obtained by media outlets, investigators tied him to the crime through a fingerprint recovered inside the Gutierrez home. Officials did not specify where the fingerprint was discovered or when it was conclusively linked to McDowell. However, Deborah had known for years about its existence, recalling it was found on a window she cleaned nightly. To her, it was undeniable proof, as only Jessica's abductor could have left it behind. The warrant further noted that McDowell had been picked out in a photo lineup, and that evidence indicated he had admitted to others that he had kidnapped and killed Jessica. The reinvestigation in 2021 saw FBI special agents and state prosecutors return to the area. With assistance from South Carolina law enforcement, they interviewed more than 125 people, combed through over 3,500 pages of case records, and enlisted the resources of 10 FBI field offices nationwide. In their official statement, authorities credited the arrest to decades of persistent work by local, state, and federal investigators, along with the tireless commitment of community members who refused to let Jessica's memory fade. Though Jessica's body has never been found, her family and law enforcement hold on to the hope that this time justice may finally be within reach. The suspect was expected to cooperate with authorities by clarifying the facts and revealing the location of the little girl. Meanwhile, Jessica's mother, Deborah Gutierrez, remains alive, though decades of unanswered questions have severely impacted her mental health. This time, it was Jessica's sister who spoke publicly after learning of the arrest. She admitted that her family never believed this day would arrive. She emphasized that her mother had fought relentlessly for 36 years to achieve justice for Jessica, praying not only for a conviction, but also for the death penalty. Speaking on behalf of the family, she expressed deep gratitude to everyone who had contributed to the arrest of the man she described as an evil monster. In stark contrast, Thomas's neighbors characterized him as a quiet, reserved man who transported his work tools in a van and never appeared violent. The family and the community now await the trial, hoping for long-awaited answers. For the moment, however, Thomas has not confessed to the crime nor revealed what happened to Jessica. Moving on to the next case. Johanna Casas. In the early morning of July 16, 2010, the quiet town of Pico Truncado in Argentina was shaken by a brutal crime. Johanna Casas, a 20-year-old model and former local beauty queen, was found dead in a remote area. She had been shot twice. The main suspects were her boyfriend at the time, Marcos Diaz, and her ex-boyfriend, Victor Cingolani. What initially appeared to be a straightforward murder case would soon unravel into a far more disturbing story. Johanna was born in Pico Truncado, a small town in northern Santa Cruz province named after a nearby flat-topped hill. The region is primarily known for its oil industry. Though official records of her birth date are unclear, social media posts and press reports indicate she was born on July 19, 1990. 15 minutes after Johanna's birth, her twin sister, Edith, was born. They were the eldest children of Marcelina del Carmen Orellana and Valentin Casas, who later had a third child. Although their parents eventually separated, Valentin, who worked as a police officer, remained actively involved in their lives. The twins were nearly identical in appearance, voice, and build. Even their names mirrored each other, Edith Johanna and Johanna. Their resemblance was so strong that their mother often confused them, occasionally changing the same baby's diaper twice. The sisters shared a powerful emotional connection. Edith once recalled being in a coma after an accident at age 11 and repeatedly asking for Johanna when she regained consciousness. At the same time, Johanna, who was at home with their father, sensed something was wrong and felt her sister calling out to her. As they matured, the twins developed distinct personalities. Edith was quiet and reserved, while Johanna was sociable, drawn to fashion and makeup. Her passion led her to pursue modeling, traveling to larger cities such as Bahia Blanca and earning the title of beauty queen in her hometown. In mid-2006, at age 15, Johanna met Victor Cingolani, then 21, during a visit to the local bingo hall with her father and brother. Victor Cingolani was sitting at another table with his mother and a friend when he noticed Johanna watching him. Known locally as a womanizer, Victor worked long shifts at the oil company and spent his free time socializing, often frequenting brothels rather than bars. He boasted of having been with over 40 women, claiming they came to him without effort. At the bingo hall that day, after a series of exchanged glances, Victor was confident he could initiate something with Johanna. According to him, she approached first, handing him a note with her name and phone number. He texted her immediately, and their communication quickly turned into a relationship. Despite the noticeable age gap, Victor was 21, Johanna just 15. Her mother Marcelina accepted the relationship, preferring it to her daughter spending time aimlessly with others. The couple dated for roughly a year and a half. During that time, Johanna's parents began to notice signs of Victor's aggression. On one occasion, while attempting to strike Johanna, he missed and shattered a window, injuring his hand. The situation grew more complex after their breakup when Victor began a relationship with Edith, Johanna's twin. He claimed his feelings for Edith developed gradually and insisted he was never involved with both sisters at the same time. During his relationship with Johanna, Edith had been dating someone else, and the four occasionally spent time together. At times, Victor would invite Johanna out, and Edith would accompany them simply because she was alone at home. Victor was attracted to Edith's calm, reserved demeanor. She was equally beautiful but more modest in character. After his relationship with Johanna ended, he remained in contact with Edith. Their connection deepened, and they eventually acknowledged mutual feelings. However, Edith insisted on speaking with Johanna before taking things further. Johanna gave Edith her blessing, saying they were adults who could make their own choices. However, the sisters' close bond began to erode. As Edith's relationship with Victor progressed, mutual friends drifted away, and each twin formed separate social circles. Eventually, Edith and Victor broke up, and he moved on to another woman in town. Both sisters continued to experience turbulent relationships afterward. 2 years later, after another breakup, Victor contacted Johanna. Though she was seeing someone else at the time, she ended that relationship to reunite with him. Their rekindled romance lasted just 2 months, ending because Johanna wanted children and Victor did not. Johanna then began dating Marcos Diaz, a man her parents deeply disapproved of. The Diaz family was surrounded by troubling rumors, including an accusation that one of Marcos's brothers had killed his own child. Marcos had a known violent temper and was extremely possessive. He constantly monitored Johanna, bombarding her with messages and refusing to let her go out alone. Despite these alarming signs, they moved in together just 6 months into the relationship. During this time, Victor rekindled his relationship with Edith, confessing he had never gotten over her. This ongoing entanglement between the twins and Victor set the stage for a series of tragic and scandalous events. On July 15, 2010, 4 days before the twins' 19th birthday, Johanna went out partying with Marcos. They stayed out until around 3 a.m. She was last seen alive as they left the venue together. The next morning, a dog walker discovered Johanna's body in an open field roughly 3 miles from Pico Truncado's center. The area, known as the Forest Belt, quickly became the epicenter of a high-profile investigation after it was confirmed that one of the Casas twins had been murdered. An autopsy showed Johanna had been shot at close range, once in the chest and once between the ribs. Within hours, police arrested both Marcos Diaz and Victor Singolani due to their past and current ties to Johanna. Investigators theorized that Johanna had tried to end her relationship with Marcos, and that the men had conspired to kill her under the belief that if she couldn't belong to them, she wouldn't belong to anyone. Despite being the last person seen with Johanna, Marcos was released a week later due to insufficient evidence. However, DNA recovered from a cigarette, but at the crime scene later matched him. By then, Marcos had fled. Authorities would not locate and detain him until more than 6 months later, when he was placed in pretrial custody. Victor remained in custody, charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend, though he consistently denied any involvement. He claimed that on the morning of July 16th, he had been at a casino before spending time at a friend's house until 6 a.m. Surprisingly, the arrest did not immediately sever his ties with Edith. Victor later recalled that during his first night in jail, he requested access to a phone to call Edith, intending to declare his innocence and express his desire to see her again. However, Edith hung up the moment she recognized his voice and soon changed her number, cutting off contact. Still desperate to see her, Victor faked a headache to be taken to the hospital. During the transport, he saw Edith walking with another man, confirming their relationship had ended. Victor remained in custody, charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend, though he consistently denied any involvement. He claimed that on the morning of July 16th, he had been at a casino before spending time at a friend's house until 6 a.m. Surprisingly, the arrest did not immediately sever his ties with Edith. Victor later recalled that during his first night in jail, he requested access to a phone to call Edith, intending to declare his innocence and express his desire to see her again. However, Edith hung up the moment she recognized his voice and soon changed her number, cutting off contact. Still desperate to see her, Victor faked a headache to be taken to the hospital. During the transport, he saw Edith walking with another man, confirming their relationship had ended. Edith later revealed she had been in a state of emotional crisis. She was grieving the loss of her twin, the person she was closest to, and felt overwhelmed and overmedicated. In mid-2012, 2 years after Johanna's death, Victor went to trial, facing accusations of being controlling and abusive. The prosecution based its case on 3 key elements: a paraffin test taken shortly after his arrest that detected gunpowder residue on his hands, evidence from tracking dogs that placed him at the scene, and the failure of his alibi, as he couldn't account for his whereabouts during the time of the murder. Victor's attorney challenged the validity of the investigation, citing serious procedural flaws, including an alleged audio recording of the presiding judge admitting that local police mishandled the case due to inexperience. Edith later disclosed that she had been in a state of emotional turmoil. She was mourning the loss of her twin, the individual she was closest to, and felt burdened and excessively medicated. In mid-2012, 2 years after Johanna's passing, Victor went on trial, confronting allegations of being domineering and abusive. The prosecution built its argument on 3 main components: a paraffin test conducted shortly after his detention that showed gunpowder residue on his hands, evidence from tracking dogs that placed him at the location, and the collapse of his alibi, as he failed to explain his whereabouts during the time frame of the killing. Victor's lawyer disputed the credibility of the inquiry, pointing to major procedural errors, including an alleged audio tape of the presiding judge admitting that the local authorities mishandled the matter due to lack of experience. Edith later disclosed that she had been in a state of emotional turmoil. She was mourning the loss of her twin, the individual she was closest to, and felt burdened and excessively medicated. In mid-2012, 2 years after Johanna's passing, Victor went on trial, confronting allegations of being domineering and abusive. The prosecution built its argument on 3 main components: a paraffin test conducted shortly after his detention that showed gunpowder residue on his hands, evidence from tracking dogs that placed him at the location, and the collapse of his alibi, as he failed to explain his whereabouts during the time frame of the killing. Victor's lawyer disputed the credibility of the inquiry, pointing to major procedural errors, including an alleged audio tape of the presiding judge admitting that the local authorities mishandled the matter due to lack of experience. In spite of these obstacles, the proceedings began on June 18, 2012. The prosecutor demanded a 20-year penalty because of the supposed use of a firearm, while another recommended 15 years, and Victor's counsel pleaded for his full acquittal. Victor opted not to give testimony. The tribunal listened to several witnesses. Johanna's father accused Victor of prior violent acts and threats against his daughter. He recounted a moment when he overheard Victor on a speakerphone conversation threatening Johanna. A woman who resided near the site of the crime stated her son was the only one at home that night and remarked on the delayed arrival of police. The man who discovered Johanna testified that he observed no blood at the site. Another witness spoke of Victor's difficult interactions with the twins, implying he regarded Edith as a replacement for Johanna. Despite these difficulties, the trial commenced on June 18, 2012. The prosecutor requested a 20-year sentence due to the alleged use of a firearm, while another proposed 15 years, and Victor's defense pushed for his total acquittal. Victor chose not to testify. The court heard from multiple witnesses. Johanna's father accused Victor of previous violent behavior and threats toward his daughter. He described an instance when he overheard Victor on a speakerphone call making threats to Johanna. A woman living close to the crime location said her son had been the only one at home that evening and commented on the late response of police. The individual who discovered Johanna testified that he noticed no blood at the location. Another witness spoke of Victor's strained relationships with the twins, suggesting he viewed Edith as a substitute for Johanna. Edith herself took the witness stand, having been present every day of the hearings wearing a shirt demanding justice for her sister. She testified that Victor had been physically violent toward both her and Johanna and alleged that he had pressured them into intimate involvement. She finally declared that she believed Victor had been involved in Johanna's killing, labeling him a psychopath. The sessions ended, and on June 27, 2012, Victor received a 13-year prison sentence for simple homicide. However, the disputes around the case were not yet settled. Despite his conviction for Johanna's death and the severe accusations against him, Edith later stunned everyone by revealing that she had resumed a relationship with Victor. It remained uncertain how this renewed connection developed, but at some stage, Edith became persuaded of Victor's innocence and came to believe that the actual offender in the crime against her twin sister was Marcos, who awaited trial while held in pretrial detention. Despite these difficulties, the trial commenced on June 18, 2012. The prosecutor requested a 20-year sentence due to the alleged use of a firearm, while another proposed 15 years, and Victor's defense pushed for his total acquittal. Victor chose not to testify. The court heard from multiple witnesses. Johanna's father accused Victor of previous violent behavior and threats toward his daughter. He described an instance when he overheard Victor on a speakerphone call making threats to Johanna. A woman living close to the crime location said her son had been the only one at home that evening and commented on the late response of police. The individual who discovered Johanna testified that he noticed no blood at the location. Another witness spoke of Victor's strained relationships with the twins, suggesting he viewed Edith as a substitute for Johanna. Edith herself took the witness stand, having been present every day of the hearings wearing a shirt demanding justice for her sister. She testified that Victor had been physically violent toward both her and Johanna and alleged that he had pressured them into intimate involvement. She finally declared that she believed Victor had been involved in Johanna's killing, labeling him a psychopath. The sessions ended, and on June 27, 2012, Victor received a 13-year prison sentence for simple homicide. However, the disputes around the case were not yet settled. Despite his conviction for Johanna's death and the severe accusations against him, Edith later stunned everyone by revealing that she had resumed a relationship with Victor. It remained uncertain how this renewed connection developed, but at some stage, Edith became persuaded of Victor's innocence and came to believe that the actual offender in the crime against her twin sister was Marcos, who awaited trial while held in pretrial detention. When questioned about her sworn statement, Edith asserted that she had been compelled by her parents to make those allegations. Concerning the evidence introduced by the prosecution, Edith aligned herself with the defense. As Victor's attorney had maintained during the trial, there had never been definitive proof placing Victor at the site of the crime. He also pointed out problems with the paraffin test, emphasizing that it was performed without expert witnesses present, and the officer conducting it failed to use gloves and even cut the tape with his teeth. In addition, Victor was discovered to have the highest level of gunpowder on his right hand. He justified this by saying he had been inside his brother-in-law's truck, who regularly went hunting and sometimes left bullets on the seats. With regard to the tracking dogs, the defense asserted that 2 of them had produced negative outcomes, with only one showing a positive indication, and there were no witnesses to support this. They also claimed that a person's scent could remain at a location for as long as a month. Victor declared that the entire trial was fixed, arguing that in Santa Cruz, anyone could be condemned merely to satisfy the demands of the victim's relatives. During his imprisonment, Victor turned to carpentry, saying that Johanna's death had changed him, causing him to give up his drinking and partying lifestyle. Meanwhile, Edith had moved in with Claudia, Victor's sister, possibly due to alienation from her own family after she chose to reunite with the man convicted of her twins' killing. Together, they sold chairs, stools, tables, magazine holders, portraits, and paintings that Victor created while in prison. When questioned about her sworn statement, Edith asserted that she had been compelled by her parents to make those allegations. Concerning the evidence introduced by the prosecution, Edith aligned herself with the defense. As Victor's attorney had maintained during the trial, there had never been definitive proof placing Victor at the site of the crime. He also pointed out problems with the paraffin test, emphasizing that it was performed without expert witnesses present, and the officer conducting it failed to use gloves and even cut the tape with his teeth. In addition, Victor was discovered to have the highest level of gunpowder on his right hand. He justified this by saying he had been inside his brother-in-law's truck, who regularly went hunting and sometimes left bullets on the seats. With regard to the tracking dogs, the defense asserted that 2 of them had produced negative outcomes, with only one showing a positive indication, and there were no witnesses to support this. They also claimed that a person's scent could remain at a location for as long as a month. Victor declared that the entire trial was fixed, arguing that in Santa Cruz, anyone could be condemned merely to satisfy the demands of the victim's relatives. During his imprisonment, Victor turned to carpentry, saying that Johanna's death had changed him, causing him to give up his drinking and partying lifestyle. Meanwhile, Edith had moved in with Claudia, Victor's sister, possibly due to alienation from her own family after she chose to reunite with the man convicted of her twins' killing. Together, they sold chairs, stools, tables, magazine holders, portraits, and paintings that Victor created while in prison. When questioned about her sworn statement, Edith asserted that she had been compelled by her parents to make those allegations. Concerning the evidence introduced by the prosecution, Edith aligned herself with the defense. As Victor's attorney had maintained during the trial, there had never been definitive proof placing Victor at the site of the crime. He also pointed out problems with the paraffin test, emphasizing that it was performed without expert witnesses present, and the officer conducting it failed to use gloves and even cut the tape with his teeth. In addition, Victor was discovered to have the highest level of gunpowder on his right hand. He justified this by saying he had been inside his brother-in-law's truck, who regularly went hunting and sometimes left bullets on the seats. With regard to the tracking dogs, the defense asserted that 2 of them had produced negative outcomes, with only one showing a positive indication, and there were no witnesses to support this. They also claimed that a person's scent could remain at a location for as long as a month. Victor declared that the entire trial was fixed, arguing that in Santa Cruz, anyone could be condemned merely to satisfy the demands of the victim's relatives. During his imprisonment, Victor turned to carpentry, saying that Johanna's death had changed him, causing him to give up his drinking and partying lifestyle. Meanwhile, Edith had moved in with Claudia, Victor's sister, possibly due to alienation from her own family after she chose to reunite with the man convicted of her twins' killing. Together, they sold chairs, stools, tables, magazine holders, portraits, and paintings that Victor created while in prison. With the earnings, he purchased a pair of rings. During one of the prison visits, Victor proposed to Edith, and she accepted. As expected, Edith's engagement to the man imprisoned for murdering her sister was heartbreaking news for the twins' parents, who could not make sense of what was unfolding. To them, Victor had taken the life of one daughter and was destroying the other. At that point, Marcelina stated that it felt as though Edith had also died. Since moving in with her sister-in-law, Edith had scarcely seen her family. She believed they had brainwashed her daughter and that Claudia never left her side for a moment. When the engagement was revealed, Edith's family filed a legal injunction to try to stop the marriage, arguing that the 23-year-old was mentally unstable and fearing for her well-being. The ceremony was initially planned for December 5, 2012, when Victor had only served about 6 months of his prison term. However, the injunction postponed the wedding. Regardless, Edith showed no indications of psychological or mental conditions that would prevent her from marrying. On February 14, 2013, Victor and Edith were wed amid heavy disapproval. Their story, a woman marrying the man accused of killing her twin sister, captured worldwide attention. An Argentine reporter known for his daring journalistic style secured the exclusive rights with a bid of $1,500. Reporters from nations such as Germany and the United States traveled to their small town, and major media organizations like the BBC and the Daily Mail covered the event. Edith even received proposals from Playboy magazine and was invited to participate in Argentina's most popular television show, Dancing for a Dream, but she declined all of them. On their wedding day, just before noon, the couple went to the civil registry office in Pico Truncado, which was under heavy guard due to the uproar. Trouble broke out when Victor, still serving his sentence, arrived in a prison transport. The crowd turned violent, hurling punches, stones, eggs, and tomatoes while shouting insults. Both the vehicle and the registry's doors sustained damage, making the wedding headline news. Despite the disorder, Edith and Victor proclaimed their love and their intention to build a family. Yet, the judicial dispute over Johanna Casas' killing was far from resolved. On June 4, 2013, the trial commenced for Marcos Diaz, who had been detained at the Pico Truncado police station. Originally charged as an accessory, Marcos was depicted in court records as violent and controlling, notorious for harassing his girlfriends and frequently engaging in armed brawls. His unexplained journey the day after Johanna's murder was interpreted as an attempt to flee, and he ceased sending messages to Johanna immediately after her presumed time of death, implying he knew she was already gone. This stood in sharp contrast to the numerous texts he had sent her the day before. DNA taken from a cigarette butt and a music CD associated with Marcos, both discovered near Johanna's body, were significant pieces of evidence against him. During the hearings, Edith, standing in support of Victor, tearfully accused Marcos of murdering her sister. Valentin, the twins' father, also testified, recounting the final time he saw Johanna with Marcos and portraying Marcos as a dangerous figure tied to cult-like practices, frequently seen causing disturbances at the cemetery. Marcelina, for her part, depicted the defendant as obsessive toward her daughter. He never allowed her to be alone, not even for family gatherings. Nonetheless, the case took an unforeseen turn when the prosecutor broadened the charges. He argued that Marcos was the true perpetrator of Johanna's murder and the sole individual present at the scene when her life was taken. Consequently, on July 2, 2013, the court sentenced Marcos Diaz to 12 years in prison for Johanna's homicide. At this stage, two men had been convicted for the same killing, each judged guilty by separate courts. After the ruling, Marcos voiced his discontent with the punishment, reaffirmed his innocence, and asserted that he had been convicted only because there was no one else left to investigate. On the other hand, Edith expressed satisfaction and joy that justice had at last been achieved. Meanwhile, the twins' mother chose to remain silent with the press, while their father voiced his disagreement with the judgment. Victor's attorney declared intentions to request his immediate release, insisting that they had always upheld his innocence. If the proof truly demonstrated that Marcos had been the sole individual at the crime scene, his client would be freed at once. In the end, on December 5, 2013, the Higher Court of Justice declared Victor's release due to lack of sufficient evidence to convict him. Following his release, Victor pursued compensation from the state, demanding $75,000 for his unjust imprisonment. Nevertheless, he received no restitution. With time, Marcelina began reconsidering her perspective on the events and eventually came to accept that Victor had not taken part in Johanna's murder. Although the union between Edith and Victor endured for several years, by 2021 it became known that they had separated. She was residing with a new companion and expecting her first child, while he had rebuilt his life with another woman. After more than 20 years of entangled love affairs, a violent crime, and a pair of equally disputed trials, the case of Johanna Casas appeared to have finally arrived at an end. Yet, even now, there remain those who argue over the details and continue to wonder whether Victor was truly guiltless of the events of July 16, 2010, or if he succeeded in walking away unpunished from one of Argentina's most notorious crimes. Moving on to the next case. Lindsay and Hawker. In October 2006, Lindsay and Hawker, an intelligent and ambitious young woman, set out on a journey to Japan in search of adventure, cultural discovery, and the opportunity to inspire others through teaching English. What began as a thrilling chapter in her life soon took a tragic and unimaginable turn. Merely 4 months after her arrival, Lindsay went missing after agreeing to meet a man who had asked for private English lessons. Several days later, her body was discovered buried inside a bathtub filled with sand on the balcony of a quiet apartment in Chiba. How could a simple act of kindness result in such a horrific fate? And who was the man responsible for this chilling crime? Born on December 30th, 1984, in Coventry, England, Lindsay and Hawker grew up in a caring and supportive family. Her parents, Bill and Julia Hawker, instilled in her the values of compassion, determination, and a strong desire to explore the world. As the eldest of 3 daughters, Lindsay was a role model for her younger sisters, admired for both her intelligence and her empathetic character. She excelled academically from an early age, especially in the sciences, and studied at King Henry VIII School in Coventry. Her teachers consistently praised her commitment and her eagerness to help classmates, reflecting her kind personality. Beyond her academics, Lindsay was active in sports and music, demonstrating her lively and well-rounded character. For higher education, Lindsay pursued a biology degree at the University of Leeds, motivated by her passion for studying life and her ambition to make a positive difference. Her time at university was marked by intellectual drive, academic success, and a vibrant social circle. Recognized for her infectious laughter and positive spirit, Lindsay developed lasting friendships and left a deep impact on everyone she met. In 2006, she graduated with first-class honors. While many of her peers chose traditional career paths or further studies, Lindsay envisioned something different. She longed to experience life outside of England, immersing herself in another culture while contributing to society. Teaching English abroad seemed like the perfect opportunity to fulfill that dream. After thoughtful consideration, Lindsay decided to move to Japan, fascinated by the nation's rich traditions, deep history, and modern advancements. Her family felt mixed emotions about her decision. They were proud of her adventurous spirit, but worried about her being so far away. Nevertheless, they gave her their full support, knowing Lindsay to be independent and capable, ready to embrace the world on her own terms. Before leaving for Japan, Lindsay and Hawker spent precious time with her family and friends, promising to keep in touch and return with stories of her adventures. In October 2006, Lindsay arrived in Japan, filled with excitement and ready for the new chapter in her life. She had secured a teaching role at Nova, then Japan's largest private English conversation school. Well known for its wide branch network and strong reputation for English education, Nova gave Lindsay the chance to teach conversational English to a wide variety of students, from young professionals to retirees eager to learn from a native speaker. From the beginning of her teaching, Lindsay's warmth and enthusiasm made her stand out among her students. Her friendly personality and ability to create a positive, engaging classroom atmosphere set her apart. Despite the demands of her work, Lindsay quickly adjusted to her new surroundings. She settled in Chiba, a suburban area outside Tokyo, where she shared a comfortable apartment with 2 other foreign teachers. The 3 of them grew close, often exploring the city, enjoying meals together, and supporting one another as they adjusted to life in Japan. Lindsay found happiness in her daily routines, often cycling to Chiba Station to commute, which allowed her to enjoy the scenery and reflect on her day. Through phone calls, emails, and Skype, she stayed in regular contact with her family and boyfriend in England, keeping them reassured and sharing her experiences. Yet, unknown to Lindsay, her bright journey was soon headed toward tragedy. For days before her death, Lindsay came across Tatsuya Ichihashi, a 28-year-old Japanese man from Chiba Prefecture, while on her way home from work. Ichihashi, a loner obsessed with fitness and carrying a troubled past, had grown up near Lindsay's neighborhood. Though he had a degree in horticulture, he was unemployed and financially dependent on his wealthy parents. His intimidating appearance, reinforced by frequent gym training and martial arts, added to his menacing presence. Ichihashi approached Lindsay at a train station, claiming he was one of her students. Polite and respectful in appearance, he at first seemed harmless. Lindsay, always kind-hearted and trusting, spoke with him, likely assuming he was simply a friendly local wanting to improve his English. Yet Ichihashi's motives were far darker. After their short conversation, he followed Lindsay as she cycled home, keeping pace on foot while persistently asking personal questions. Although Lindsay may have felt uneasy, her natural courtesy led her to remain polite. When she reached her apartment, she attempted to end the encounter, but Ichihashi pressed further, asking for a glass of water. Reluctant at first, Lindsay eventually let him inside, likely as a cautious act of kindness. She introduced him to her 2 roommates, possibly to safeguard herself by making others aware of his presence. Once inside, however, the encounter took a grim and unexpected turn. Ichihashi continued to act harmless, even drawing a portrait of Lindsay and signing it with his name, phone number, and email. This odd gesture may have lowered her guard further. As a caring and professional teacher, Lindsay might have viewed it as a chance to help someone sincerely eager to learn English. When Ichihashi said he was interested in private lessons, she agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe 4 days later. Although Nova technically forbade private tutoring, it was common for teachers to offer lessons on the side. The choice of a public and familiar setting likely made Lindsay feel secure. During the meeting, Ichihashi acted normally, reinforcing her impression that he was simply another student wanting to learn. But when the session ended, he claimed he had forgotten money for payment and suggested they go to his nearby apartment to get it. At first reluctant, Lindsay eventually accepted after receiving reassurance. Ichihashi's earlier politeness, along with the casual and public setting, may have lowered her natural caution. Being trusting by nature and not wanting to seem rude, she went along with his request. They left the cafe together and took a taxi to his apartment complex, only a short distance away. Before entering, Lindsay showed caution by asking the driver to wait outside, telling him she would be just a few minutes. Her likely plan was to collect the payment quickly and return. Sadly, those minutes turned into a tragic eternity. After waiting several minutes without seeing her return, the driver assumed she had simply changed her plans and drove off. Unknown to him, Lindsay had already walked into a deadly trap she would never leave. As soon as Lindsay entered Tatsuya Ichihashi's apartment, his demeanor shifted completely. From an apparently polite student, he revealed his true nature as a predator. Without warning, he struck Lindsay on the head, knocking her unconscious. What followed was a nightmarish series of events that displayed his cruelty and calculated intent. He bound her wrists and ankles with plastic ties and gagged her with scarves, preventing her from calling for help or escaping. Over the hours that followed, Ichihashi inflicted severe physical abuse. Lindsay's body later showed heavy bruising, especially on her upper body and face, evidence of a long and violent struggle. At some point during the ordeal, Lindsay regained consciousness and likely tried to resist. However, Ichihashi, being physically stronger and trained in martial arts, quickly subdued her. Forensic evidence confirmed that Lindsay died after Ichihashi strangled her with such force that the cartilage in her neck was broken, a ruthless and deliberate act meant to silence her forever. To hide his crime, Ichihashi resorted to even darker measures. He shaved Lindsay's head, possibly to change her appearance or delay recognition. He then placed her body in a bathtub, filling it with a mixture of sand and compost soil to hasten decomposition. To speed the process further, he sprayed the mixture with a chemical commonly used for compacting and breaking down waste. After the killing, neighbors recalled hearing unusual noises from his apartment, including something heavy being dragged across the floor. Yet no steps were taken in time to avert the tragedy. On March 24, 2007, Lindsay failed to come home after her scheduled private lesson with Ichihashi. Her sudden disappearance, highly unusual for someone normally so responsible and communicative, immediately alarmed her roommates. Lindsay was known for keeping them updated about even small changes to her plans. With no word from her, they tried to reach her by phone, but she did not answer. By the next morning, with still no sign of her, their fears deepened. They remembered she had gone to meet a student and thought of the sketch Ichihashi had drawn of her, along with his details. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, they reported her missing to Nova, the school where she worked. Nova contacted the police, and an investigation was quickly launched. Using the information from Lindsay's roommates, including the drawing, Ichihashi's name, and his contact details, police traced him to his apartment in Ichikawa, Chiba Prefecture. Officers went to the location on March 26, just 2 days after Lindsay was last seen. On arrival, they noticed the curtains drawn and no obvious signs of movement inside. Though the apartment appeared still, there were subtle hints that someone was present. The police refrained from knocking, as they required a warrant or sufficient cause to enter. Instead, they began monitoring the apartment while awaiting proper authorization and backup. Meanwhile, Lindsay's roommates, along with her family back in England, endured increasing anguish. The uncertainty became nearly unbearable. Her father, Bill Hawker, would later recall the torment of waiting, holding on to hope without knowing the worst had already happened. At about 5:40 p.m. on March 26th, the case shifted dramatically. Officers watching the apartment noticed movement and faint noises suggesting someone was inside. Deciding to act, they moved forward cautiously. Before they could proceed further, the door suddenly opened and Tatsuya Ichihashi emerged barefoot, carrying a rucksack. On spotting the police, he instantly grasped the situation and fled. One officer managed to seize his bag, but Ichihashi slipped free and dashed barefoot down the stairs. Despite their chase, he eluded capture, leaping several flights of stairs and sprinting into the streets. Lacking proper communication tools, the officers struggled to coordinate the pursuit. By the time reinforcements arrived, Ichihashi had vanished into the surrounding neighborhood. The abandoned rucksack contained only gym clothes and personal effects, offering no immediate clues to aid the search. Determined, the police initiated a wide manhunt and circulated wanted posters bearing his photograph. Following his escape, police entered the apartment and uncovered a horrifying scene. On the balcony, concealed in a bathtub filled with sand and compost soil, lay the body of Lindsay and Hawker. The tub had been moved outside, and the soil mixture appeared intended to hasten decomposition. Her remains showed clear evidence of the violent assault she endured. Her wrists and ankles were bound, her face was badly bruised, and her belongings, including her purse and clothing, were scattered around the apartment, confirming her identity. The grim discovery shocked both Japan and the United Kingdom, with news of the brutal crime spreading rapidly, fueling intense media coverage and widespread outrage. The Hawker family, waiting anxiously for updates, was heartbroken when their worst fears were confirmed. News of Ichihashi's escape spread rapidly, sparking outrage and fear. Many questioned how he had managed to slip away despite being surrounded by multiple officers. In the aftermath of his escape, the police launched a nationwide manhunt. Ichihashi was added to Japan's most wanted list, with his face displayed on posters, television broadcasts, and news reports across the nation. Authorities established checkpoints, stepped up patrols, and pursued numerous reported sightings, yet Ichihashi remained out of reach. As weeks turned into months, the trail went cold. Despite extensive efforts and countless reports, he remained free for more than 2 years. By early 2008, frustration intensified among both the public and the police as Ichihashi continued to evade capture. He seemed to vanish into obscurity, moving constantly without leaving a trace. Rumors and unconfirmed sightings only muddled the search further. In response, the Japanese National Police Agency raised the reward for his capture from 1 million yen to 10 million yen, reigniting public interest in the case. Posters displaying his altered appearance and the likelihood of disguises were placed in cities, train stations, and public areas. While on the run, Ichihashi underwent multiple cosmetic surgeries to change his facial features. He visited clinics under false names and even crudely operated on his own lips to thin them. Though living an unstable, itinerant life, he managed to secure work at a construction site in Osaka, earning barely enough to survive. Colleagues later recalled him as a loner who seldom interacted with others. In October 2009, he made a critical error. Seeking another cosmetic procedure, he visited a clinic in Nagoya. The staff, noticing his resemblance to the wanted posters, quietly alerted the police and provided vital information. Acting on this lead, authorities moved quickly. On November 10, 2009, Ichihashi was spotted at a ferry terminal in Osaka, attempting to board a vessel bound for Okinawa. Officers closed in and finally captured him, bringing an end to his 2.5-year flight. His arrest brought a sense of relief to Lindsay's family and the public, though during the initial interrogations Ichihashi refused to speak. His lawyers claimed he had been threatened with the death penalty if he did not cooperate, which they argued explained his silence. As the inquiry advanced, he eventually admitted involvement in Lindsay's death, but insisted it was accidental, claiming he had only tried to stop her from screaming. The trial of Tatsuya Ichihashi began in July 2011 and drew intense media scrutiny. Prosecutors presented a strong case highlighting the brutality of the crime and his calculated attempts to avoid arrest. They demanded the maximum sentence, emphasizing the horrific nature of the murder. Lindsay's family attended, seeking justice, and her father, Bill Hawker, delivered an emotional plea urging the court to impose the harshest penalty. The defense countered that Ichihashi expressed remorse and could be rehabilitated. On July 21, 2011, the Chiba District Court delivered its ruling. Tatsuya Ichihashi was convicted of rape and murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. While the court recognized the gravity of the crime, it cited his lack of prior convictions and apparent remorse as reasons for not imposing the death penalty. The Hawker family expressed their disappointment, having hoped for a more severe punishment, though they found some comfort in knowing he would remain in prison for life. In the years after the trial, Lindsay's parents dedicated themselves to preserving her memory. They established a foundation to support young people aspiring to study and work abroad, ensuring Lindsay's legacy lived on in the ambitions of others. The case also prompted wider conversations about the safety of foreign workers in Japan, especially women. In response, Nova and other language schools introduced stricter safety protocols to prevent future tragedies. Meanwhile, Ichihashi remains incarcerated at Nagano Prison. In 2011, he authored a book titled Until I Was Arrested, recounting his years as a fugitive. He offered the royalties to the Hawker family, but they refused, stating that no financial sum could ever atone for his crime. Moving on to the next case. Lynn Ernon. Lynn Ernon was born in June 1956 in Madison, the capital of Wisconsin, USA. She was the only child of Lorraine and Robert Ernon. Her birth was a joyful and meaningful event for the newly married couple. Robert, a World War II veteran, had established his own plumbing business after returning to the United States, while Lorraine worked in real estate sales. Their stable financial position enabled them to provide Lynn with many opportunities. Robert and Lorraine were recognized for their warmth, and their home was always full of happiness and the presence of friends and loved ones. It was no surprise that Lynn, from an early age, showed an extroverted and friendly character. Her parents owned a cabin outside the city, which quickly became her favorite place. Lynn eagerly looked forward to spending her school vacations there. For her father, those trips were the ideal escape, while Lorraine appreciated the calm and beautiful scenery surrounded by lakes and serenity. As a devoted admirer of nature, it was there that Lynn developed a deep love for animals. Soon this affection became a passion for rescuing and caring for abandoned creatures, with a particular fondness for cats, making it usual for her to always have a new pet. During her high school years, Lynn's strong interest in maintaining her appearance became evident to everyone. After finishing her studies in 1974, she chose not to follow a traditional university path, but instead decided to train as a hairdresser. With her father's encouragement, Lynn opened her own salon. Before long, thanks to her social skills, she built a solid clientele. Around this time, she developed a close friendship with Corinne Posa. Also from Madison, Corinne was married. The two soon realized they shared an enjoyment of life's simple pleasures. Corinne admired Lynn's capacity to think carefully before making decisions and to handle her finances wisely, which allowed her to live without unnecessary extravagance. In 1983, Lynn began a romantic relationship with Jim Kelleher. Although little is known about his personal background, it is clear that his friends regarded him as a man with a free and adventurous spirit. These traits quickly charmed Lynn. With that, the couple embraced a lifestyle of constant movement, always seeking natural surroundings that offered the tranquility they longed for. However, after several years together, their relationship declined, leading them to part ways. Even so, their affection for one another kept them as close friends. Around this period, Lynn met Jennifer Flower, originally from Franklin, Wisconsin, who was a single mother to a 9-year-old daughter named Jessie Korchevsky. Lynn's compassionate nature moved her to support both mother and child, taking a special role in helping raise young Jessie, for whom she developed a deep fondness. In 1998, Corinne welcomed her only son, Anthony Pozo. From then onward, he became a treasured part of Lynn's extended family. As he grew older, Anthony enjoyed spending time with the Ernons, whether playing with Robert, who often shared stories of World War II, or watching classic films with Lynn. During the summer of 2002, when Jessie graduated from high school, Lynn was filled with pride. She frequently showed pictures of the two of them at the graduation ceremony to visiting friends. 5 years later, when Robert passed away, the loss was so devastating for Lynn that she sank into depression. Nevertheless, with her resilient spirit and optimism, she eventually managed to overcome this difficult chapter. Meanwhile, her dear Jessie was struggling to adapt to adult life. Choosing not to pursue higher education, she frequently switched jobs. Yet these were not the only worrying signs. In February 2010, in pursuit of quick money, Jessie opened a bank account using the names of a neighboring couple and secured loans amounting to $4,000. 2 months later, she committed even graver fraud, this time targeting her own mother. Without Jennifer's awareness, Jessie took her Social Security card, identification documents, checks, and car title, securing a loan exceeding $6,000. She also obtained a loan against the car title. When an arrest warrant was issued for Jessie, she attempted to escape and used fraudulent checks to pay for a hotel. Nevertheless, the authorities caught up with her, and she was taken into custody. In the end, Jessie received a sentence of 2 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. In 2013, Lorraine's death marked another devastating loss for Lynn. During this painful period, the steadfast support of her friend Corinne, along with visits from Jennifer and Jessie, who had returned after serving her sentence, played a vital role in helping her recover. Lynn continued to live in her usual way, concentrating on saving money and enjoying the company of her cherished cats. She also avoided technology, owning neither a cell phone nor a computer. She preferred conducting her transactions through cash or checks, a practice Anthony found old-fashioned yet endearing. Although she possessed a credit card, she used it sparingly and always aimed to settle any debt promptly. Meanwhile, Jessie found new employment and began dating a man named Scott, who was single but had a daughter from a previous relationship. The two soon moved in together and discovered a shared enthusiasm for casinos, which they visited twice weekly. Jessie often exhausted all her money at these venues. At the beginning of 2016, Lynn started to experience several health problems, including back pain and complications with her heart and liver, which demanded ongoing medical care. Consequently, she spent most of her time at home. At first, Jennifer assumed the role of caregiver, but eventually, her younger and more energetic daughter Jessie took on the responsibility. This provided Jessie with access to Lynn's credit cards. Additionally, Lynn signed blank checks for her to handle groceries and medications. In August 2016, when Anthony began university, he made it a routine to visit Lynn's house on his way to campus. During their lunches together, Lynn voiced her wish to support him financially with his studies. However, Anthony firmly insisted that their relationship should never appear to be based on financial motives. In spite of this, Lynn always found a way to give him some money to cover his expenses. In contrast, during her frequent visits, Jessie began to excessively use Lynn's credit cards, taking out cash advances, making online purchases, and spending beyond what Lynn could afford. She wasted money in casinos and city bars, aware that Lynn did not closely monitor her finances. As Jessie's spending escalated, her job performance suffered, and she was eventually terminated. However, she kept this hidden so that neither her boyfriend nor her friends were aware. She even lied to Scott, claiming that Lynn was in intensive care due to a coma, giving herself more freedom to act without supervision. Conscious of Lynn's declining health and the potential need for a nursing home, Lynn worried about the welfare of her cats. She entrusted Jessie with their care and granted her power of attorney to manage her possessions if necessary. She also drafted her will, naming Jessie and Anthony as primary beneficiaries. She informed each of them separately about this decision. From that moment, Jessie focused on finding a way to permanently remove her benefactor. The sinister plan quickly formed in Jessie's mind. As she was responsible for administering Lynn's medications, she discovered that some of them included eye drops containing tetrahydrosaline. After researching online, she learned that ingesting large amounts of this substance could be deadly. One night, after returning home visibly intoxicated from a bar outing with friends, Jessie told her boyfriend Scott that someone might have laced her drink with eye drops, causing her drowsiness. It was late, and Scott, also tired, dismissed her unusual claim. In the last week of September 2018, Lynn was hospitalized, and the medical staff recommended transferring her to a long-term rehabilitation facility. Lynn refused the suggestion, feeling humiliated by her physical condition. She forbade Jessie from telling anyone about her hospitalization, determined to avoid being seen in such a vulnerable state, so unlike the woman she had once been. That same week, remembering he had missed her birthday, Jim attempted to contact her. However, Jessie answered Lynn's home phone and told him that Lynn was in the hospital and did not want visitors. After Lynn was discharged with a recommendation for home medical care, a first visit was scheduled for October 1, 2018. She postponed it to October 5, choosing to remain isolated from everyone. By that time, Jessie had already spent approximately $144,000 from Lynn's accounts, yet she wanted it all. On October 3, 2018, exploiting Lynn's lack of attention to her own health, Jessie visited her under the guise of administering medications. While preparing the usual pills, she secretly poured the contents of 6 bottles of eye drops into a glass of water and gave it to Lynn. The poison took effect, and Lynn gradually lost consciousness and died. Jessie carefully staged the scene, scattering some crushed pills on a table near Lynn's body to create the appearance of an overdose. She then called 911, claiming she had found her friend unresponsive and not breathing. When emergency responders arrived, they discovered Lynn lifeless in a reclining chair in the living room. In her statement to Officer Kelsey, Jessie described her relationship with Lynn and her role as caregiver, implying that Lynn, perhaps overwhelmed by her health problems, had chosen to end her own life. After the body was transported to the morgue, the police prepared a preliminary report, considering the case a possible suicide. However, during interviews with those close to Lynn, Jim expressed disbelief at such a possibility. He stated that the woman he had known for years would never make that choice, as it was entirely out of character. Anthony shared a similar perspective, telling investigators that despite Lynn's fragile health, he had always seen her as a person of strong optimism. When Anthony and Jessie met for the first time following the tragedy, Anthony immediately noticed the stark contrast between his own grief and Jessie's cold detachment, coupled with her obvious interest in the inheritance she stood to gain. Around this period, Jessie opened a department store account in Lynn's name to acquire a credit card. Barely a week after Lynn's death, she announced a garage sale on social media, selling Lynn's personal belongings, including her furniture. By the end of 2018, when Jessie appeared with lavish Christmas gifts, Scott became seriously concerned. Just weeks later, the county medical examiner, after conducting toxicology tests on Lynn's body, discovered elevated levels of tetrahydrosaline in her blood, amplified by the effects of her other medications. The experts concluded that her death was not the result of self-harm or an accident, as it was impossible to ingest such a dose through normal eye use. The head of the medical examiner's office submitted the toxicology report to the authorities, prompting the sheriff's office to reopen the investigation. Once Jessie learned that the investigation had been reopened, she was keen to know the results, but the police refused to disclose them to her. In the following months, the investigation increasingly pointed to Jessie as the main suspect. On July 9, 2019, Jessie was arrested and interviewed by the police. During the interview, she tried to convince the authorities of her frustration over not knowing the cause of Lynn's death. The most striking detail was her claim that Lynn was a habitual user of both legal and illegal substances, although she was careful to note that this never prevented Lynn from being functional. Jessie alleged that while she always made sure Lynn adhered to her treatments, Lynn would abuse alcohol or pills, and during those times, thoughts of self-harm would emerge. In a subsequent interview, when questioned about her financial incentive for caring for Lynn all that time, Jessie explained that although there was never an official agreement, Lynn often gave her checks or allowed her to use her credit card. She emphasized to the agents that Lynn was always generous with her resources, a quality that stood out even more as she was aware of her impending end. During the third interview, the detectives played their strongest card, informing Jessie about the lethal tetrahydrosaline poisoning. Jessie immediately claimed that Lynn often used eye drops in large quantities, buying multiple bottles at once. The agents responded by pointing out that no such bottles were found at Lynn's residence, and that the substance levels in her system were inconsistent with ocular use. Faced with the evidence, Jessie's explanations became increasingly contradictory. Although she initially found the idea of voluntary ingestion hard to believe, she then suggested that Lynn might have researched ways to end her life and settled on poisoning. Regarding the crushed pills found on Lynn's body, Jessie said that Lynn had difficulty swallowing. However, the detectives, suspecting it was a staged scene, made their thoughts clear to Jesse. In response, Jesse vehemently denied any involvement in Lynn's death, even suggesting that the toxicologist had made an error, claiming she had never heard of the lethal effect of simple eye drops. The authorities then decided to question Scott. When they mentioned that Lynn had been administered high doses of the eye drop component, Scott recalled Jesse's strange comment about someone possibly spiking her drink with eye drops, causing her drowsiness. This led to another interrogation where Jesse again denied knowing about the substance's action. However, this time she changed her initial story, alleging that Lynn had confessed to her about unsuccessfully trying to take her own life with pills. According to Jesse, Lynn began mixing the eye drops with vodka over several days, though it only caused her stomach discomfort. Jesse also claimed to have seen Lynn drinking this mixture the day before her death. She then recounted that on the morning of October 3, 2018, Lynn had asked for a bottle of water that Jesse had previously mixed with the contents of 6 eye drop bottles and vodka. They argued because Jesse initially refused to give it to her. Eventually, however, thinking it would not be lethal given Lynn's habitual consumption of the mixture, she relented. When questioned by investigators about why she had not disclosed this earlier and why she had not alerted anyone to prevent the fatal outcome, Jesse simply stated that if Lynn no longer wished to live, she had every right to act accordingly. Despite her attempts to evade responsibility and avoid charges, a review of the credit card statements revealed unusual spending patterns for someone like Lynn, who rarely left the house. The statements showed transactions in bars and casinos, locations Lynn had never frequented. At this stage, Anthony's cooperation with authorities proved crucial, as he clarified Lynn's financial habits, which sharply contrasted with these expenditures. Jesse's criminal history of fraud and her gambling addiction further revealed her malicious intent to the police, making her motives to harm Lynn unmistakably clear. Consequently, she was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide and 2 counts of grand theft, though she pleaded not guilty. She was held without bail, with a bond set at $1 million. While awaiting trial in jail, Jesse formed a friendship with another inmate named Magdalena. Jesse confided in Magdalena that Lynn had died from a medication overdose, and even admitted that she had spent Lynn's money in casinos and on luxuries she otherwise could not afford. The process to bring Jesse to justice experienced some delays, but finally began on October 24, 2023, after a 5-year wait. In his opening statement, the prosecutor presented an unflattering portrayal of the accused to the jury. In response, the defense, referring to Lynn as a mother figure to their client, argued that Lynn herself would have disagreed with the prosecution's account if she were present, dismissing it as an unfounded story. The attorney characterized Lynn as a woman with self-destructive tendencies, insisting on the theory of consummated self-harm. However, the medical examiner's testimony sharply contradicted this narrative, asserting that the poisoning had undoubtedly been caused by a third party. He highlighted Jesse's suspicious insistence on learning the cause of Lynn's death. The prosecution revisited this point, suggesting that during the planning of her crime, Jesse had not anticipated a toxicology test for tetrahydrosaline on her victim. When Jim and Anthony testified, both confirmed that Lynn would never have allowed Jesse to squander her assets. Then an unexpected testimony emerged, further cornering the accused and strengthening the case against her. The critical revelations came from Magdalena, Jesse's cellmate. After 2 days of deliberation, on Tuesday, November 14th, the jury delivered its verdict. As the judge read their decision, Jesse broke down in tears, fully aware that she faced the possibility of a mandatory life sentence. Outside the courthouse, the prosecutor expressed condolences to Lynn's family, satisfied with the outcome. Anthony conveyed profound gratitude to the detectives and prosecutors for their relentless pursuit of the truth. In his own words, thanks to them, he could confirm what he had always suspected, that something was deeply wrong with Jesse. The sentencing hearing occurred on Friday, April 5, 2024. Accompanied by her new attorney, Jesse spoke for 2 hours about what she claimed was a flawed legal process, arguing that she had not received effective defense. Nevertheless, after her testimony, the judge sentenced Jesse to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years for the murder of Lynn Hernan. Additionally, she was required to serve 5 consecutive years for 2 counts of theft, making her ineligible for parole until she reached the age of 80. Furthermore, She was ordered to pay $386,000 in restitution through an escrow account for any earnings from interviews, book deals, films, or documentaries related to the case. Present in the courtroom during the victim impact statements, Anthony addressed Jessie, wishing that her time in prison would compel her to reflect on her actions. He stated that, as he had hoped, her facade had finally ended and she could no longer deceive anyone. Although he felt satisfaction with the sentence, he acknowledged that it was impossible not to miss Lynn, who had been like an aunt to him. In honor of that bond, Anthony plans to select a monument where Lynn's remains can be laid to rest, aiming to provide her soul with the same tranquility and peace she had always sought in life. Moving on to the next case. Rachel Marie Runyon. The story of Rachel Marie Runyon began on June 23, 1979, when she was born amid the peaceful surroundings of Weber County, Utah, United States. She was the only daughter of Jeff and Elaine Runyon. Their firstborn was named Justin, while the youngest child was Nathan. The three siblings grew up in harmony, sharing joy and creating cherished memories together. Accounts of her life in 1981 describe Rachel, with her natural charm, as the 2-year-old who ascended to a kind of childhood royalty when she was crowned Little Miss Sunset. With her golden hair and luminous smile, she drew admiration at every community gathering. Yet little Rachel's appeal extended beyond physical beauty. Her inner nobility was even greater, as her mother Elaine often emphasized. She was a gentle and affectionate child, frequently seen lingering at the edge of playgrounds. Highly observant and thoughtful, she instinctively avoided the rougher games that Justin and the other boys engaged in. She often sucked her thumb while watching the antics of others, a habit that gave her an even sweeter, almost comical appearance, which stirred much affection from those around her. Her mother sometimes teased her about her future, predicting she would grow rabbit or beaver teeth, jokes that Rachel would meet with a mischievous giggle. The Runyon family eventually settled in Sunset, a town of only about 6,000 inhabitants at the time, which seemed like a safe haven to raise their children. Their modest home stood close to the playground of Doxey Elementary School. For the three little Runyons, that park became their sanctuary of laughter and delight. Believing they were doing the best for their children, Jeff and Elaine built a gate in the fence of their yard, creating a direct passage to their children's beloved play spot. Despite the seeming serenity of Sunset, Jeff and Elaine remained ever watchful, consistently reminding their children about the dangers of trusting strangers. They stressed the importance of staying in familiar, secure places and, most of all, taught them never to go with someone unknown, regardless of what might be offered. Their dedication to their children's safety was unwavering. On the late morning of August 26, 1982, 3-year-old Rachel, her younger brother Nathan, and the eldest 5-year-old Justin approached their mother with a simple request. They had asked for permission to go to the playground at Doxey Elementary School, located less than 5 meters from their home. Although Elaine had always been cautious about allowing her children to play unsupervised, the closeness of the playground and her need to finish preparing lunch convinced her to grant their request. Still, ever careful, she kept watch from the kitchen window while she cooked. However, when lunchtime came around at approximately 12:55 p.m., only Nathan and Justin returned home. Little Justin's voice trembled as he told his mother what had taken place just moments earlier. He recounted that a young man had forcefully taken Rachel from the park. The man had first attempted to entice all 3 siblings, promising them ice creams and chewing gums from a nearby store. While the children played in the open air, he approached them, insisting he had gum-flavored ice cream waiting in his car. In her innocent excitement, Rachel mentioned her favorite flavor, but Justin, taking on the role of protective older brother, quickly warned her not to listen to the stranger. Rachel then began to walk away, but the man was faster, seizing her roughly and hoisting her over his shoulder, muffling her cries as he carried her to his vehicle. Frozen with fear, Justin and Nathan had not yet recovered from the shock when their mother called them in for lunch. In an instant, Elaine was thrust into her worst nightmare. Her heart pounding, she rushed to the store the man had mentioned, frantically questioning employees and customers in desperate hope. Yet no one recalled seeing Rachel or the suspect. Barely 20 minutes after her daughter's abduction, Elaine arrived at the Sunset Police Department to report the kidnapping. Overcome with anguish, she could hardly speak, her words breaking under the weight of despair. The Sunset Police responded quickly, organizing a search plan that included vehicle inspections throughout the city. Despite their swift action, the suspect remained at large, and Rachel was nowhere to be found. With time running short, a specialized team of 10 investigators drawn from various law enforcement agencies across Utah was assembled under the leadership of Sheriff Brant Johnston, determined to unravel the mystery of the child's abduction. Testimonies from Justin and another 10-year-old child who had been at the park provided crucial descriptions. They depicted a light-skinned African-American man, estimated to be between 30 and 35 years old, with a distinctive afro hairstyle and a prominent mustache. He was seen driving an old, dark blue four-door vehicle adorned with wooden panels along its sides. Witnesses recalled that he had lingered in the park for at least 15 minutes, sipping coffee and engaging with several children before forcefully taking Rachel. His tactic appeared to be gaining the children's trust by playing with them, lowering their guard and minimizing the likelihood of screams. Thanks to the sharp recollections of the children, authorities were able to produce a detailed composite sketch. However, Justin and the other 2 children remained the sole direct witnesses, as no security cameras had recorded the abduction on the school playground. Despite repeated appeals from the police and the media, no one came forward to report seeing a man matching that description. Investigators pressed on with forensic analyses and exhaustive door-to-door inquiries, supported by a neighborhood committee whose members even offered monetary contributions to fund an improvised search effort. Meanwhile, the Runyon family embarked on a devastating yet determined mission to find their beloved Rachel. With few resources but an unbreakable resolve, they, alongside community volunteers, organized various initiatives to aid the search. A nationwide flyer campaign featuring Rachel's image was carefully coordinated, with friends and neighbors canvassing neighborhoods in a desperate race against time. Thousands of missing person posters were distributed, ensuring the case of Rachel Runyon gained widespread attention. The public responded in force, flooding investigators with tips regarding possible sightings of Rachel or leads on the suspect's identity. Yet, despite the relentless pursuit of each clue, most led only to disappointment. 1 week after the tragic abduction, Rachel's parents, Jeff and Elaine, traveled to New York to participate in a press conference, determined to sustain media focus and underscore the pressing urgency of their daughter's safe return. Jeff, in a brave appeal, expressed the profound harm the abductor had caused both to their daughter and to themselves, urging anyone with knowledge to come forward. Elaine, visibly tormented, raised the possibility that Rachel might have been sold following her abduction and implored potential adoptive parents to make sure they were not unknowingly adopting her missing child. The family's tireless efforts were soon overshadowed by the crushing reality of escalating financial burdens, which reached $10,000 in postage costs alone within only 3 weeks. The long-term sustainability of such overwhelming physical, emotional, and financial strain appeared nearly impossible. On September 3rd, the distraught parents took their appeals to the Today Show, where they announced a $20,000 reward, primarily funded through community contributions, in the hope of gathering new leads on Rachel's whereabouts. The people of Sunset showed extraordinary solidarity, contributing another $20,000 to the reward, bringing the total to $40,000, a considerable sum at that time to encourage Rachel's safe return. Yet on September 19, 1982, an unexpected discovery shattered the lingering hope of her safe recovery and left her loved ones devastated. A family traveling in Mountain Green, Utah, stumbled upon the partially buried remains of a young girl, later identified as Rachel despite advanced decomposition. The circumstances of her death remained uncertain, with asphyxiation not excluded as a potential cause. After the heartbreaking confirmation of Rachel's fate, Jeff and Elaine arranged a proper farewell attended by more than 300 mourners. Rachel was finally laid to rest in Washington Heights Memorial Park in Ogden, Utah. Amid their devastation, Elaine transformed her grief into determination, dedicating herself to improving child safety and pushing for stronger laws surrounding abduction cases, raising both awareness and change in a world that had dealt her immeasurable suffering. Though her heart was shattered, her resolve endured as she became a pillar of support, offering advice, comfort, and strength to other parents thrust into the nightmare of missing children. As many accounts emphasize, Rachel's legacy extended beyond her own tragedy. Her abduction and the horrific circumstances of her death resonated within the corridors of power, driving meaningful reform. By October 1982, federal legislation had been enacted, granting parents of missing children access to an information-sharing system overseen by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This new database began collecting and preserving the fingerprints and blood type records of more than 300,000 children in Utah, aiming to build an essential tool in the fight against child abductions. It may seem bleak to claim that the excruciating loss of Rachel to an unidentified abductor was not in vain, yet that is the truth. In April 2002, the state of Utah introduced the Rachel Alert System, created to notify residents about ongoing child abduction and missing children cases. This initiative arose as a beacon of hope. It was only triggered when strict conditions were satisfied, such as the child being a minor or mentally disabled, in immediate danger, and not having run away voluntarily. Providing detailed physical descriptions of the child was also a requirement. The Rachel Alert was activated only twice, during the disappearance of Elizabeth Smart in June 2002 and the abduction of 3-month-old Nicholas Triplett in January 2003. Both children were eventually recovered alive. After Elizabeth Smart's safe recovery, recognizing the effectiveness of such alert systems, 41 states went on to adopt the Amber Alert System, named after another young victim, Amber Hagerman. In April 2003, Utah shifted from the Rachel Alert to the Amber Alert System to align with national protocols. However, this did not mean that the memory of the 3-year-old would fade. To honor her legacy, the Attorney General's office established the Rachel Runyon Award, presented to citizens who assist in recovering a missing child by contacting law enforcement when an alert is issued. Elaine was also invited to take part in these award ceremonies. Today, the Amber Alert System in Utah is tested twice annually, on January 13th and August 26th, the dates commemorating Rachel's abduction. Although Rachel's killer remains at large and the case unsolved, Lieutenant Phil vowed that her memory will never fade. Phil, the first officer to respond to Elaine's urgent call after Rachel's abduction, has consistently stood by the Runyon family. Over the years, he has repeatedly reaffirmed the Sunset Police Department's unwavering dedication to finding the person responsible for Rachel's kidnapping and tragic death. In 2007, the case was formally reopened, with police working in close cooperation with the Utah Attorney General's office in their pursuit of the perpetrator. At that time, a $58,000 reward was offered to anyone providing information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of the offender. With the reward seemingly insufficient to draw forth decisive information, hopes of unmasking the perpetrator rest heavily on meaningful progress in forensic technology since 1982. Strategies such as the possible exhumation of Rachel's body to obtain further evidence were also contemplated. In 2007, DNA testing on items recovered near the site of her remains yielded preliminary results, but they failed to significantly move the investigation forward. Despite the barriers and uncertainties, the Runyon family clings to hope that justice will ultimately prevail. Over the years, the circle of suspects has shifted. In 2012, it was revealed that attention had turned toward an inmate in a Pennsylvania prison who had once lived in Sunset in 1982. Although no formal charges were filed against him, he was designated as a person of interest in Rachel's abduction and murder. Another potential suspect is a man with a criminal history residing in New Mexico. Chief Ken Aborn of Sunset Police acknowledged that certain evidence suggests this individual's possible involvement, though it remains insufficient for a lawful arrest. In spite of these challenges, the pursuit of justice for Rachel continues, upheld by the unwavering resolve of both her family and investigators. In May 2016, the park, a silent witness to her abduction, was officially renamed Rachel Runyon Memorial Park. On August 26th, during a deeply emotional ceremony, it became a lasting tribute to the little girl's memory. Her commemorative stone, engraved with her likeness and a brief account of her story, was placed within the park grounds, honoring her short-lived life. This was not the only significant gesture made in Rachel's name. In March 2017, Utah formally established Rachel Runyon Missing and Exploited Children's Day, a yearly observance intended to stress the importance of child safety, inspired by Rachel's tragic story. In 2019, fresh hope emerged when private investigator Jason Jensen began assisting the Runyon family. Jensen, co-founder of Utah's Cold Case Coalition, had been investigating a separate crime from the 1970s. Witnesses in that case had provided inaccurate details about the suspect's appearance, leading Jensen to re-examine the descriptions offered in Rachel's case with renewed scrutiny. Specifically, he considered whether Justin, Rachel's brother, might have misjudged the abductor's racial identity due to his young age and the fact that they lived in a predominantly white neighborhood where encounters with African Americans were scarce. Jason spoke with Elaine about the possibility that Justin may have actually seen a Latino man abducting his sister. Justin himself never described the abductor as African American. Instead, he recalled a man with a dark complexion and a distinctive mustache divided by a gap in the middle. The authorities, however, had given greater weight to the description offered by another older child present at the park that day. According to Jason, this misinterpretation may have steered the investigation off course for nearly 40 years. Correcting that detail opened the door to identifying a new person of interest, potentially bringing the case closer to resolution. Jason also clarified more about the suspect's vehicle, a 1973 blue-painted car with wooden side panels, which allowed for a more targeted search. Shortly after the updated sketch of the suspect was publicized, a woman came forward with a compelling lead, stating that her uncle, who had a history of sexual assault and abuse, had been in and out of prison and strongly resembled the sketch, fit the profile. He had been released from prison in 1981, lived in the area during Rachel's abduction, and drove a blue car with wooden panels identical to the one Jason suspected was used. Unfortunately, the man had since passed away. Without a confession or definitive DNA evidence, investigators lacked the proof needed to directly link him to Rachel's murder. Although police reportedly collected a DNA sample from his daughter to compare with evidence recovered in 2007, the results have not been publicly disclosed. Since the tragedy, Elaine has dedicated her life and Rachel's legacy to protecting other children by raising awareness among both children and parents about the dangers of abduction and related crimes. Each year, on the anniversary of Rachel's abduction, the family gathers for small ceremonies at the park that now bears her name. Though the case remains unsolved, these events serve as reminders to the community and appeals for anyone with information to come forward to the Sunset Police regarding Rachel's disappearance or the perpetrator's identity. Moving on to the next case. Rui Pedro Teixeira. This dreadful case unfolded in Lausada, a village located in the northern part of Portugal, a region celebrated for its vineyards, its famous green wine, and its reputation for holding the youngest population in the nation. Situated in the center of the municipality carrying the same designation, this village lies close to the northwestern coast of Portugal, a destination for summer leisure for travelers coming from different parts of Europe. Inside this picturesque village, on January 28, 1987, Rui Pedro Teixeira came into the world. His parents, Filomena and Manuel, praised his energetic and cheerful spirit together with his extraordinary inventiveness and imagination. To summarize, this household, including their youngest daughter, Karina, enjoyed a peaceful and fulfilled existence. As a youngster, Rui Pedro was full of vitality. After finishing his regular schoolwork, he took part in lively football games with his cherished cousin, Joe Andre, along with other neighborhood youngsters. His dream was to become a professional goalkeeper, and so he always chose to play in that position. Among the group of boys, another pastime was biking, and he was frequently observed speeding through the village to make sure he attended his daily mathematics lessons on time. Yet one shadow hung over his otherwise tranquil childhood. Rui Pedro struggled with epilepsy. Manuel and Filomena owned a driving school. One day, an ordinary young man called Afonso Dias came to the school with the intention of securing his driver's license. Filomena quickly realized that Afonso was enduring financial struggles. Famous for her remarkable compassion, she at once looked for ways to help him. At first, she gave him clothes, and as their relationship grew closer, she offered him the chance to work at the school, allowing him to earn additional money. 3 years went by, and due to Filomena's generosity, Afonso became a truck driver at only 22 years of age. The family placed so much trust in Afonso that they depended on him to collect Rui Pedro and Karina from school and bring them safely home. For this, Afonso used his brother's vehicle, a Fiat Uno, while they spent time together each day. An uncommon companionship developed between Afonso and Rui Pedro. The family did not regard it as unusual, particularly since Afonso had a youthful and playful nature, which caused him and Rui Pedro to feel like siblings. Nevertheless, the maternal grandparents regarded their bond with doubt. Manuel, by contrast, worried about Afonso smoking near the boy and thought of him as a poor influence. Fearful of the results of this friendship, Manuel spoke with Filomena about it. But she remained persuaded of Afonso's good intentions and believed he meant no damage. Ultimately, as in every solid marriage, they settled on a compromise, with Filomena consenting to watch over their dealings. On March 4, 1998, close to 2 p.m., Rui Pedro pedaled his bike to his mother's workplace, which was only a few blocks from home, to inform her that Afonso had invited him for a drive in his brother's car. Filomena disliked the idea and instructed him not to go. Instead, she directed him to a nearby field where his friends were waiting to play soccer, stressing the importance of arriving punctually to his 5 p.m. lesson. Although he felt let down at first, Rui Pedro complied. He took off his bicycle helmet and walked toward the soccer field. When he arrived, he met his friends, except for Joao Andre, whose mother had forbidden him from going out. Unexpectedly, a black Fiat Uno, driven by Afonso, entered the field a few minutes later and halted next to Rui Pedro. They exchanged a brief conversation, and afterward, the boy set aside his bicycle helmet, climbed into the car, and waved goodbye to his companions through the passenger side window with a simple motion. Between 5 and 6 that evening, a phone call disrupted the family's calm and marked the beginning of the Teixeira family's darkest days. Rui Pedro's tutor telephoned to tell them that the boy had not appeared at his class. This was extremely uncommon since Rui Pedro had never before missed a lesson. Panic overcame his parents, who feared that a sudden epileptic seizure might have left him unconscious, potentially resulting in serious brain injury if he did not receive immediate medical care. The word spread swiftly around the village, and alarmed residents quickly took action. They formed small search groups to comb the entire area. Soon afterward, they discovered their first lead. A neighbor stated that at around 3 p.m., he had noticed Rui Pedro's bicycle concealed in some bushes close to the soccer field where he had been playing. Manuel and Filomena knew their son deeply. They recognized that his bicycle was precious to him, and he would never abandon it without a valid reason. This convinced them that Rui Pedro might have been taken by force. Without any delay, they hurried to the police station to register his disappearance. After receiving the report, the police began their inquiries by interviewing the 3 boys who had played soccer with Rui Pedro. These companions described how a black vehicle had entered the field to collect their friend, clearly identifying Afonso as the driver. They pointed out that Afonso's conduct had been odd and domineering toward their young peer. At first, the officers distrusted the children's testimonies and opted to dismiss their words. Nevertheless, they relayed the misleading detail to the mother, which fueled her suspicions. Filomena then revealed Rui Pedro's request earlier that afternoon to meet up with his companion. Instantly, everyone's attention was directed at the truck driver, and the police moved forward to inspect his residence. Afonso received the officers willingly, ready to answer what they called routine questions. As the final individual to have seen the boy, his account could reveal vital details. Nevertheless, the truck driver stayed strangely composed and insisted he had not encountered Rui Pedro. His demeanor aroused suspicion among the officers, considering the numerous witness statements they had obtained. As a result, he was brought to the police station for deeper interrogation. Once at the station, Afonso attempted to provide an alibi. He claimed that his brother had requested him to take the car for its yearly inspection, a compulsory requirement in Portugal for vehicles older than 8 years. Yet the records indicated that he had never appeared for the arranged appointment that afternoon. Afonso held on to his version, continuing to reject that the child had entered the vehicle earlier in the day. He only admitted to a short meeting lasting 5 minutes with Rui Pedro before 2 p.m. Later, he alleged that he had driven to a nearby town, about 15 kilometers from Lausada, and parked in front of a pharmacy. Afonso declared that he remained in the car for some time before choosing to walk around the city, even noting that he admired the store displays. Once he became weary, he drove to his girlfriend's home, arriving at 6:45 p.m. The woman resided in another village in the area, just 11 minutes distant from Lausada. Meanwhile, in the reception area of the police station, Rui Pedro's grandfather and cousin waited nervously, intent on pressing for faster progress in the investigation. When Afonso's questioning ended, the two of them encountered the suspect in the corridors. On seeing him, the grandfather pleaded desperately about his grandson's location and promised anything in return for an answer. Afonso burst into tears and maintained that he had no knowledge of the child's location. Still, he cautioned that if they hoped to find him, it was crucial to shut all borders because he had likely been abducted and taken toward another country. The cousin also challenged Afonso and even referred to a conversation they had shared with Rua Pedro the previous day. The man's sole reaction was to yell at the boy to keep quiet once and for all. Yet the cousin was undeterred. Instead, he carried on the account with further specifics. Afonso had suggested taking both of them to meet prostitutes and said that the meeting place would be an empty lot. Following these revelations, a large-scale police search was initiated across the region, involving local inhabitants, firefighters, and even the deployment of bloodhounds to track the scent of the missing boy. The officers believed that the boy might have had a seizure and was unconscious somewhere in the village. Or maybe he had simply wandered far away and couldn't find his way back. In summary, they considered it a case of a search and rescue, ruling out the hypothesis of kidnapping. Rua Pedro's family was outraged by this approach to the case. Due to the extensive dissemination of Rua Pedro's images in the local media, a sex worker recognized his face and contacted the local police. She stated without hesitation that on March 4, 1998, a black car had stopped in front of her on a desolate road. The driver offered her $10 to have sex with the little boy who accompanied him. She asked how old the boy was, and the man replied that he was old enough. The woman took him behind some bushes by the side of the road and looked for a private place where no one could see them. There was no sexual contact. The young boy was deeply terrified, crying without pause and repeating again and again that he wanted to go. Witnessing the child in such a distressed condition, the sex worker could not help but feel pity for him. She spent nearly 15 minutes attempting to console him. She embraced him firmly and reassured him that everything would eventually be all right. Amid his sobbing, he admitted to her that he had been forced to attend that encounter. After leaving the bushes, the boy entered the car, and that was the last moment she saw him. Every indication pointed toward an abduction, yet even with this strong witness account, the police still hesitated to completely accept this explanation. In a desperate appeal, the family urged the authorities to act swiftly, emphasizing that each passing minute could be decisive for the child's survival. The next morning, shortly after the court opened, they succeeded in convincing the public prosecutor's office to request the involvement of the judicial police, a specialized body tasked with investigating major crimes such as murders, kidnappings, organized crime, and terrorism. Within 24 hours of Rui Pedro's last sighting, several judicial police agents arrived in the town. In the days that followed, together with relatives and neighbors, they carefully searched the whole region, suspecting that Rui Pedro might have been abandoned somewhere. The circulation of posters showing the boy's photograph increased, spreading on a national scale, and the entire nation of Portugal was profoundly shaken by the case. The disappearance of the boy ignited a massive feeling of collective grief. People began calling Rua Pedro our boy, or our little Pedro. At the same time, the family started receiving a flood of telephone calls, many of which were cruel and upsetting. Some claimed they were holding Rua Pedro, while others offered tips about his location that ultimately led nowhere. The boldest callers even demanded ransom money. One particularly horrifying call featured a child whose voice sounded frighteningly similar to Rua Pedro's. Amid shrieks and sobs, he cried desperately for his mother. Pointing to the difficulty of tracing every call, the police decided not to follow up on any leads that came via telephone. The family's despair deepened, and the dismissal of possibly crucial information for the investigation seemed both incompetent and negligent. In April 1998, 1 month after the disappearance, a new suspicion surfaced. A well-known Portuguese journalist traveled to Disneyland in Paris with his wife and children to prepare a report that would be published in a widely circulated magazine in Portugal. The article included several photographs of him and his family at different attractions in the park. In one of these pictures, a particular image raised serious concerns. In the background, a small child could be seen with a man wearing red. Filomena and Manuel viewed the picture and declared with certainty that it was Rui Pedro. In September of that same year, a major development took place when British police dismantled a pedophile network in an operation called Operation Cathedral. This group mainly functioned online and operated as a database containing thousands of photos and videos of children who had been sexually abused. This operation attracted major public attention because of the unusually vast quantity of pornographic material owned, created, and shared by members of this organization. Alarmingly, authorities uncovered more than 750,000 photographs and 1,800 videos. Out of the 1,263 individuals appearing in the confiscated content, only 17 were recognized. 1 from Argentina, 1 from Chile, 1 from Portugal, 6 from the United Kingdom, and 7 from the United States. Filomena affirmed that Rui Pedro appeared in some of those images, proving that he was still alive, but nothing further. There were no coordinates or indications of his possible whereabouts. The British police speculated that members of the ring had abused him on film and possibly harmed him afterward. Across the following 13 years, the Portuguese public ministry assembled a case against Afonso, who continuously asserted his innocence. The trial commenced in November 2011. The principal testimonies came from Rui Pedro's 3 companions, forming the foundation of the prosecution, while the judge managed to confirm certain aspects presented in court. Several statements were dismissed due to insufficient conclusive proof. In March 2012, Afonso was acquitted. On Rui Pedro's 27th birthday, January 28, 2014, a video appeared that rapidly spread on social media. Various actors voluntarily took part in this campaign. Its purpose was to seek new information concerning Rui Pedro's location, while also displaying the email addresses of the Northern Board of Judicial Police and the Portuguese Association for Missing Children, ensuring that the young man's case would not vanish into obscurity. This campaign carried a broader mission of denouncing child trafficking for sexual exploitation. Returning to the judicial proceedings, Afonso's freedom proved short-lived. Following an appeal filed by Rui Pedro's family in 2014, the Porto Court of Appeals issued a new ruling that sentenced him to 3 years in prison. This conviction was for inciting a minor to engage in involuntary sexual relations, but it bore no connection to the kidnapping or to any charges associated with the disappearance itself. Although Afonso's defense attorney lodged an appeal, the Portuguese Supreme Court upheld this second ruling. On October 3, 2014, the decision was ratified, and on March 18, 2015, Afonso was placed under arrest after police issued a warrant. He was released on parole in March 2017, having completed only 2/3 of his term. Afonso persisted in asserting his innocence, insisting he was the victim of a grave miscarriage of justice. 20 years after the disappearance, in 2019, Rui Pedro was officially declared presumed dead. The police concluded their search as no new leads had surfaced since Operation Cathedral, and the case had turned cold. The young man's fate remains an agonizing mystery. Despite the relentless grief and the unhealed wound of not knowing what befell her son, Filomena never gave up. In 2007, she established the Association of Relatives of Missing Children. Rui Pedro's case underscored a dire reality. We are confronted with an extremely serious phenomenon. Each year, 3 million children are abducted across the world. In Portugal alone, more than 60 children and minors remain missing. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.